Chapter 387. Xiahou words made Xiahou Wujiang look stunned. It was a big taboo for a senior martial artist to attack a junior martial artist. Even when Xiahou went to the Guanzhong torture room to ask for Su Du, it was all under the excuse of seeking justice for seventh uncle. He did not believe that Su Du, the head of the Shaolin Temple's Kongji Zen Hall, and a well-known martial Dao grandmaster, would openly attack a junior martial artist like him. Xiahou sneered. You juniors don't even understand the matters of the underworld. What kind of people don't exist in the underworld? Some people follow the rules, but some people don't. Su Du is the head of the Kongji Zen Hall, but do you know what his nickname was in the past? Monk Sanfeng. This guy was powerful and talented. Among the Su generation in the Shaolin Temple, in terms of talent, he was second only to the abbot Su Xiai and the head of the Wangyan Zen Hall, Su Yun. However, this monk was an out-and-out lunatic. He had once gone crazy 3 times a day, and no one could stop him. He had even dared to point at the nose of the previous abbot and curse 18 generations of his ancestors. He had almost been expelled from the Temple of Great Light. After Su Xiai took charge of the Great Light Temple, Su Du became much more well-behaved. Although he was the head of the Kongji Zen Hall, he did not care about the matters of the Kongji Zen Hall. With this guy's personality, do you think he was joking when he said he would break your head? He even dared to curse the previous abbot. What else would he not dare to do? Remember, you must not provoke this kind of madman. He is not an existence that can be measured with common sense. Xiahou Wujiang nodded, but he was also covered in cold sweat. It was better to be careful when playing tricks with a martial Dao grandmaster. Otherwise, it was easy to die without even knowing how. But Xiahou Wujiang did not regret it, because his words had worked. On the Great Light Temple's side, Xiahou Wujiang's provocation naturally could not be hidden from Su Du and Su Yan. The two of them did not care, but the other younger disciples of the Great Light Temple exploded. The Great Light Temple was the leader of the North Buddhist sect. As a Buddhist sect, although they were not too overbearing when dealing with other sects, they would not allow others to humiliate them. Just like what Xiahou Wujiang had said, allowing Chu Xiu to strut around in the arena was an insult to the Great Light Temple, and it also disappointed their disciples. Therefore, a martial artist in his 30s, who was from the Ming generation, ignored Su Yan's advice and walked into the ring, shouting, "Disciple of the Temple of Great Light, Ming Cheng, challenges the Guanzhong torture room's Chu Xiu." As soon as he said that, everyone present was stunned and turned to look at Chu Xiu and Ming Cheng. Although there was a challenge mechanism in the arena of the World Sword Sect Conference, a few rounds had already passed, and no one had taken the initiative to challenge anyone. The World Sword Sect meets arena is not intense. Most of them are just sparring. Looking at the few people in the arena, it was obvious that Fang Qishao had no intention to fight at all. He was just doing his job. Yan Fian was the same. Because she was a disciple of the Yunu Palace, she wanted to win a good ranking for the Yunu Palace. Nie Donglu even used the opportunity of the arena to buy people's hearts. The time he spent giving pointers to his opponents was longer than the time he spent fighting with them. As for Chu Xiu, the great battle between the righteous and demonic paths was about to begin. He was prepared to reap some benefits before it began, so he did not have any intention to fight. Therefore, things like challenging a specific person did not happen. The World Sword Sect meet was not a place to settle grudges. However, now that Ming Cheng had taken the initiative to challenge, this situation was broken. Everyone could see that Ming Cheng's aggressive manner was not a good one. Su Yan frowned and immediately wanted to stop him, but he was stopped by Su Du. Su Du said lazily, "That kid has already stood out. What's the use of stopping him? Fight, it's better to let them go. This bunch of kids are angry. If you don't let them fight, who knows, they might even secretly attack later." Su Yan frowned and said, "But what if something goes wrong? Chu Xiu is famous for being ruthless and decisive. Also, I promised senior brother Su Yun that I would not pursue this matter anymore." Su Du's expression turned serious, which was rare. He stared at Su Yan and said, "Junior brother, after being in charge of the Vajra institution for so many years, your Vajra temper has been worn away. Have you forgotten the rules of the pugilistic world? In the pugilistic world, either you are beaten to death by others, or you can only beat others to death. If you don't have the strength, then don't stand out. Can you protect them for a lifetime? Although you and I have shaved our tongues and become monks, the Great Light Temple itself is in the pugilistic world. Some rules will not change. If these junior martial artists want to fight, just let them go. Life and death are up to fate. At least your spirit is still there. Su Yan hesitated and said, "Then what about senior brother Su Yin?" Su Du instantly regained his lazy attitude and said calmly, "Go and explain. I don't want to deal with him." Looking at Su Du, Su Yan was speechless. However, he did not stop those disciples. There were martial arts masters from the 5 major sword sects around. Although he could not guarantee the absolute safety of the Great Light Temple's disciples, he could at least guarantee their lives. Since they wanted to go, then he would let them go. At that moment, on the arena, Han Tingyi frowned slightly. However, he did not say much. Instead, he asked Chu Xiu directly, "Do you accept the challenge from the Great Light Temple's Mingqing?" The arena of the World Sword Sect Conference was not that intense. Although one could challenge, the challenger had to accept it first. Chu Xiu looked at the Great Light Temple and Xiahou clan's side, and a cold look flashed in his eyes. Because of Chu Xiu's previous fierce reputation, his opponents immediately surrendered when it was his turn. Chu Xiu could only stand on the arena and wait for the next round. He saw Xiahou Wujiang's actions when he came to look for the Great Light Temple. However, because he was too far away, he did not hear clearly what the other party said. However, when Xiahou Wujiang just left, someone from the Great Light Temple came to challenge him. Clearly, Xiahou Wujiang did not say anything nice. Thinking of this, Chu Xiu could not help but reveal waves of murderous intent in his eyes. Xiahou Wujiang was like a fly, always trying to find some trouble for him. Although it wasn't too big and couldn't threaten his life, it was still very annoying. Therefore, Chu Xiu already had a plan in mind. If there were no problems, even if he, Xiahou Wujiang, did not go on the arena, he would not be able to walk out of this floating jade mountain. Seeing that Chu Xiu did not speak, Han Tingyi coughed and added, "The World Sword Sect Conference is only for exchanging pointers. It's fine if you don't want to accept the challenge. Just wait for the next round." The 5 major sword sects only wanted to lure the demonic sects to attack this time. As for other matters, it was better to avoid trouble. It was best if Chu Xiu did not agree, otherwise, it would be troublesome if he caused any trouble. However, Chu Xiu grinned and said, "Since the Great Light Temple wants to fight, I naturally can't be a wet blanket, right? I accept." As soon as this was said, most of the warriors present immediately looked at Chu Xiu. The other matches were too boring. There was no sense of urgency of fighting in the arena. Now there was finally something exciting. This also made the warriors present excited. Mingqing walked onto the arena with a cold expression. His aura gradually solidified, and a faint golden aura bloomed around him. The pressure was actually infinitely close to the unity of heaven and man realm. The disciples of the Great Light Temple had always been low-key. This was publicly acknowledged in the pugilistic world. Mingqing was a disciple of the Vajra institution. He was of the same generation as Mingchen, who died in the hands of Chu Xiu. However, he was younger than Mingchen, and his strength was also superior. Normally, a disciple of Mingqing's level could be nurtured as a future successor in other sections. However, in the Great Light Temple, Mingqing was not considered ordinary, but he could only be considered an ordinary elite disciple. There were not many disciples like this in the Great Light Temple, but they were not few either. The 3 major Zen halls and the 6 major martial institutions could find more than a dozen of them. Therefore, even though Mingqing could only be said to be a nobody in the pugilistic world, and had not even been on the Longhu leaderboard, his strength was not inferior to the elites on the leaderboard. It was just that he was slightly older. Looking at the murderous Mingqing and the indifferent Chu Xiu, Han Tingyi shook his head helplessly and said, "Since both of you are willing, then make your move. However, let me reiterate that the arena of the World Sword Sect Conference is only used for sparring, not for you to kill each other and settle your grudges. You must remember this. Otherwise, if things get out of hand, it won't look good for anyone." Chu Xiu smiled and nodded. "Senior Han, don't worry. I'm familiar with the rules of the arena competition. Nothing will go wrong." When Chu Xiu said this, the martial artists from West Chu and Northern Yin did not feel anything. However, the martial artists from Eastern Qi, especially those who had participated in the God Weapon Conference, all had strange expressions on their faces. They did not forget that when Chu Xiu had participated in the God Weapon Conference in Eastern Qi, Cheng Tingfeng of the Hidden Sword Villa had intercepted him and prevented him from killing Shen Bai. However, Chu Xiu had still dared to cripple Shen Bai under the pressure of a martial arts master. His guts were not ordinary. Now Chu Xiu said that he was familiar with the rules of the arena. Familiar with what? Familiar with how to kill someone under the nose of a martial arts master? However, Han Tingyi did not know about this. He was a martial arts master, so of course he would not care about the messy matters between the younger martial artists. Hearing this, Han Tingyi only nodded and said, "If that's the case, then do it." With that, Mingqing was just about to point at Chu Xiu and say something when he saw Chu Xiu wave his hand and say, "Cut the crap. I originally thought that the Great Light Temple would keep its promise and let this matter go. But who would have thought that you monks would go back on your word? If that's the case, what else is there to say? I just hope that you won't regret it in the end." Chapter 388. Chu Xiu's words caused Mingqing to swallow back all the words he wanted to say. Actually, at this point, it was meaningless to say who was right and who was wrong. Chu Xiu's style was to kill whoever wanted to kill him. It was that simple and direct. As for Mingqing, his senior brother had been killed, but they were forced by the elders of the sect not to take revenge. This made him feel very aggrieved, and he could not help but want to make a move. Mingqing took back what he wanted to say. He only snorted and said, "My Great Light Temple does not go back on our words. It was my personal decision to challenge you in the arena. It has nothing to do with the Great Light Temple. Moreover, this is the World Sword Sect Conference. I just want to challenge you. What can't I?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "What's the use of saying so many useless excuses? Just make a move. You monks are too straightforward. Be more straightforward. The winner will stand, and the loser will scram. It's that simple." Mingqing's eyes revealed a hint of anger and he snorted, "If you want to die, I'll grant your wish." As soon as he finished speaking, Mingqing's body flashed with dazzling golden gang qi. As it rotated, it was as if Vajra had descended to the world, burning with raging flames as he punched at Chu Xiu. The Great Light Temple had countless precious Buddhist secret scriptures. Among them, the most famous secret scripture of the Vajra department was the Furious Vajra Heart Sutra. This body tempering technique could be said to be top-notch, but its only disadvantage was that it affected a warrior's state of mind too much. This also caused most of the warriors from the Vajra department to be hot-tempered and impulsive. Of course, if one could suppress the anger in one's heart, it was equivalent to completely mastering the true meaning of the Furious Vajra Heart Sutra. It was just like the current Vajra department's first seat. He was not so impulsive, and his personality became very rational. Regardless of whether it was Ming Chun, who had died at the hands of Chu Xiu, or Ming Cheng, they had not reached this level, so they could not help but be rash and impulsive in their actions. However, this was not a big deal. In a real battle, the anger of the Heart Sutra of Furious Vajra would burn to the extreme, and its power would be extremely powerful. Just like now, Ming Cheng's punch shook the arena and made a series of explosions. Its power was comparable to that of a great master in the unity of heaven and man realm. Strictly speaking, Cheng was a martial art practitioner from the previous generation. It was just that he was relatively young, not even in his 40s. It was normal for him to be included in the younger generation of martial art practitioners. After all, the seniority in the Temple of Great Light had always been very messy. There were even martial art practitioners in the Su generation who were in their 20s. However, even though Ming Cheng was young, his cultivation was deep, and he was even stronger than Ming Chen of the past. As his fist descended, Buddhist light suppressed all evil and annihilated the devil. Its might was incomparably powerful. Chu Xiu's figure did not move. His hand formed the great Vajra will seal, and a similarly blinding Buddhist light exploded from his hand. It made Chu Xiu look like a Vajra that could subdue demons, and his might was incomparably powerful. Everyone present was stunned. Why did Chu Xiu's attainments in Buddhist techniques seem to be stronger than Ming Cheng's? The great Vajra seal collided with Ming Cheng's fist, and an ear-piercing sonic boom was heard. If it were not for the matrix that the sword hut had prepared for the arena, the two's attacks would have been enough to shatter the entire arena. After the loud sonic boom, Chu Xiu's figure did not move, but Ming Cheng could not help but take a step back. His eyes were filled with shock. In the northern Buddha sect's Temple of Great Light, Ming Cheng was proud of his own strength. In the end, he discovered that Chu Xiu's strength was even greater than his. Chu Xiu's expression did not change. He still formed the great Vajra seal in his hand and struck out once again. Out of all of Chu Xiu's techniques, the great Vajra divine power was definitely not the strongest. However, for Chu Xiu at his current stage, it was the one that was the most helpful. The martial arts that Chu Xiu cultivated could be said to be extremely diverse. Before he had the great Vajra divine power, Chu Xiu's vital qi and mental energy were not weak. The only thing he was lacking was the strength of his physical body. This was the effect of the wooden bucket. The amount of water a bucket could hold depended on its shortest piece of wood. When Chu Xiu successfully made up for his shortest piece of wood, Chu Xiu was truly invulnerable. There was not a single flaw that could be picked out in any area. Furthermore, when he was cultivating the great Vajra divine power in seclusion, Chu Xiu had even refined half of the beast's heart. This caused Chu Xiu's strength to increase greatly. Even if he were to compete with the Great Light Temple's warriors in terms of strength, he still had the upper hand. When the second great Vajra seal landed, Ming Cheng gritted his teeth. The Vajra shadow behind him bloomed, and a powerful Buddhist light condensed into a swastika seal to forcefully resist Chu Xiu's great Vajra seal. Another loud boom was heard, and Ming Cheng immediately took another step back. Chu Xiu seemed to only know the great Vajra seal. No matter what Ming Cheng's attack looked like, he would land a great Vajra seal and force Ming Cheng to take a step back. After 9 consecutive great Vajra seals landed, Ming Cheng was forced to the edge of the arena. This caused everyone present to watch anxiously, wondering if Chu Xiu could completely crush and defeat Ming Cheng. Han Tingyi, who was standing on the high platform, nodded. At this moment, he could also see that Chu Xiu's strength was truly worthy of his ranking on the Longhu list. Whether it was his own strength or his control of martial arts techniques, he had already reached the peak of the 5 Chi's origin realm. Even warriors at the unity of heaven and man realm were inferior to him in certain aspects. Basic strength, vital energy, and mental strength could be achieved through various external objects. Whether it was through seclusion, the guidance of a great teacher, or the consumption of various treasures, it was very easy to rapidly improve a warrior's realm. On the other hand, combat strength had to be improved through intense fighting, which was the most difficult aspect. Just when everyone, including Han Tingyi, thought that Chu Xiu would still use the great Vajra seal to blast Ming Cheng out of the arena, Chu Xiu's hand seal suddenly changed. This subtle change could not be noticed by others, but as a martial arts master, Han Tingyi immediately felt that something was wrong. However, it was already too late. The 5 rays of light in Chu Xiu's hand were connected from head to tail, rotating endlessly like the great sun wheel. It suddenly fell, and the power of the 5 elements reinforced and restrained each other, bursting out an unparalleled power. Sun wheel seal. No one present expected that Chu Xiu would suddenly change his hand seal in the middle of the battle. Even his opponent, Ming Cheng, did not expect this. Ming Cheng had taken 9 of Chu Xiu's great Vajra seals in a row. He already had a subconscious understanding of the changes in the power of the great Vajra seal, so he only used the martial arts technique that he was good at to resist. He was also prepared to be blasted out of the arena by Chu Xiu's seal, so he did not prepare to use his killing move. However, who would have thought that this time, Chu Xiu did not play according to the rules. Under the sun wheel seal, Ming Cheng spat out a mouthful of blood, and his internal organs were shaken. He was directly blasted more than 30 meters away, smashed on the ground and fainted. Everyone could see that under this attack, Ming Cheng would be seriously injured even if he did not die. Han Tingyi's expression changed and he shouted angrily, "Chu Xiu, what are you doing? Didn't I tell you before that the arena of the World Sword Sect Conference is for you to exchange pointers, not for you to kill?" Chu Xiu shrugged innocently and said, Senior Han, please understand. There are so many people watching here. I did not kill, and Ming Cheng is not dead yet. However, the martial artists of the Great Light Temple are very strong, so I could only use all my strength to attack. Swords have no eyes, fists and feet have no heart. Even if it is a careful sparring, isn't it normal to be injured or something? If there are restrictions, then there is no need to fight. Everyone can just sit down and talk. Han Tingyi snorted coldly. As a martial arts master, he naturally could not be calculative with a junior like Chu Xiu. Although everyone could see that Chu Xiu was quibbling, in terms of the rules, Chu Xiu really did not do anything wrong. Han Tingyi rubbed his head with a headache. It did not matter that Chu Xiu had seriously injured Ming Cheng, but the Great Light Temple was in an uproar. Seeing that Ming Cheng had been severely injured, the Great Light Temple's side became even more agitated. That group of disciples were so angry that they seemed to have lost their minds. Immediately, another warrior jumped out and said coldly, Great Light Temple's Vajra Courtyard's Mingyi challenges Guanzhong Torture Hall's Chu Xiu. Han Tingyi frowned and said to Chu Xiu, You have won a round. According to the rules, you can stop for a round to recuperate. Are you going to use it now? Chu Xiu shook his head and said, There is no need. I am not afraid of taking turns. Hearing Chu Xiu say that, Han Tingyi did not say anything else and directly let the two of them fight. Since there was a first round, there would be a second round. He would just let them fight. Mingyi walked onto the arena. He was slightly older than Ming Cheng, but his attacks were also more fierce. After going onto the arena, Mingyi did not say anything. He held a Buddhist commandment blade in his hand and slashed at Chu Xiu. His Buddhist commandment blade bloomed with Buddha's light, but the saber's momentum was extremely ruthless. Killing evil and beheading demons, merciful Buddhist commandment blade. With a merciful heart, the saber's murderous intent was limitless. Chu Xiu closed his eyes slightly, and the heavenly demon dance was already in his hand. He raised the long saber and the devil's qi and evil blood qi intertwined and condensed, bringing about a wave of extremely evil power. As the saber slashed down, the saber's momentum of the three sabers of Avicii condensed into one, and its power was terrifying. The people from the Great Light Temple wanted to find Chu Xiu for revenge, but Chu Xiu was using them to hone his own strength. When he was in the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu cultivated the great Vajra divine power, and refined half of the fierce beast's heart. His own realm could be considered to have increased greatly, which also caused a slight fluctuation in Chu Xiu's foundation. Although it was only a trace, Chu Xiu still had to hone it to a perfect realm. In such a situation, most warriors usually had two methods. One was to continue training in seclusion, until they could completely control this power. The other was to hone one's foundation through fighting and killing. Obviously, Chu Xiu chose the latter. Chapter 389. There were no weaklings among the warriors from the Great Light Temple. This was common knowledge in the martial arts world. To put it simply, the Great Light Temple should be a sect with a very low bottom line. As long as it was a warrior from the Great Light Temple, his abilities would not be too weak. The Li family's housekeeper that Chu Xiu had met in Wei County was a cook from the Great Light Temple. He was just a cook, but his abilities were considered outstanding among the rogue cultivators. As for the warriors who came to participate in the World Sword Conference, although they were not at the level of Wisdom King Zhongxian, they were still the elite disciples of the Vajra Yard. Otherwise, they would not have been brought by Su Yan to participate in the World Sword Conference. Opponents of this level were not weak. For Chu Xiu, they were good materials to train his own strength. At this moment, on the arena, Chu Xiu's Avicii demonic blade collided with Ming Yi's merciful breaking blade. A monstrous, turbulent demonic aura exploded and directly destroyed the Buddha's light blade. Moreover, this was not the end. Blood-colored astral energy erupted from Chu Xiu's heavenly demonic dance. The boundless killing intent brought about by the refined blood divine astral dance instantly enveloped Ming Yi. The saber aura enveloped him like a torrential downpour. After Ming Yi had slashed through the saber aura with great difficulty, a demonic saber that seemed to have been slashed out from hell, containing divinity, came crashing down. It directly shattered Ming Yi's saber, causing him to vomit blood as he was sent flying off the stage. Chu Xiu used the heavenly demon dance in his hand to point at the people from the Great Light Temple. He revealed a cold smile at the corner of his lips and said, "Next." As soon as he said this, everyone present was in an uproar. To provoke the Great Light Temple like this guy was simply too arrogant. The people from the Great Light Temple were even more in an uproar. A warrior did not even say his name, and directly went up the arena to attack Chu Xiu. Everyone present shook their heads. They had seen arrogant people before, but they had never seen someone this arrogant. This Chu Xiu was practically offending the Great Light Temple to death. Could it be that the Guanzhong torture room was so arrogant now that it thought it was the Jianghu's torture chamber? However, they did not know that Chu Xiu dared to be so arrogant because he did not rely on Guanxiu, but rather the entire fiend path behind him. Chu Xiu represented the Yin demon sect, or even the entire hidden demon sect. Not to mention Xiahou Su Yan and the others. Even if the abbot of the Great Brightness Temple, Su Ci, were to come, there would naturally be those big shots of the demonic Dao who would help Chu Xiu. At this moment in the crowd below, Mr. Liu, who was disguised as the Pine Wave Sword Su Songtao, looked at the extremely arrogant Chu Xiu on the arena and transmitted his voice in a low voice. This kid is really arrogant. What is he planning to do? Using all the disciples of the Great Light Temple as a whetstone to train his own strength? However, Elder Wei, this kid is not like this usually. When he needs to be low-key, he will be low-key and ruthless. This time, he wants to show off in the arena? Beside Mr. Liu, a handsome young man in white with a jade-like face stood beside Mr. Liu with a folding fan in his hand. With a low and hoarse voice he said, "This kid is smart. He is the new talent of the hidden demon sect. Now that our fiend path has gathered the entire floating jade mountain, it would not be a problem for him to be 100 times more arrogant." The handsome young man standing beside Mr. Liu was Jade-Face Heavenly Demon Wei Shuya. He had specially asked the people of the Phaseless Demon sect to help him disguise himself like this. In fact, this appearance was originally Wei Shuya's appearance when he was young. The 9 sky demons of the 5 sky demons were things that happened more than 200 years ago. Now, Wei Shuya was not afraid of being recognized. Although Wei Shuya previously said that his face was full of wrinkles, and that he was no longer the Jade-Face Heavenly Demon, now that it was time to disguise himself, he took the initiative to ask the people of the Phaseless Demon sect to disguise himself to look young. His words did not match his heart. This almost made the martial artist of the Phaseless Demon sect laugh out loud. Of course, in the end the martial artist held back. Otherwise, this Elder Wei's temper would not be so good. At this time, hearing Wei Shuya say this, Mr. Liu also heaved a sigh of relief. On the surface, Chu Xiu's identity was a rising star of the demon Dao. However, he was also a person that he and Mei Qinglian had their eyes on at the same time. He represented the Yin demon sect and their Phaseless demon sect. In the future, if Chu Xiu became famous in the hidden demon sect, he would naturally be considered as their ally. Therefore, when Chu Xiu stepped onto the arena, Mr. Liu told Wei Shuya about Chu Xiu's identity in the underworld. This was to let this veteran of the demon Dao recognize Chu Xiu as well and gain his favor. Wei Shuya was an experienced person, and he could see through Mr. Liu's thoughts at a glance. He could not help but smile and say, "Don't worry. I said before, this kid is very smart. Moreover, being arrogant is not a bad thing. As a wanderer in the underworld, he should be proud and impassioned. If a person is not arrogant when he is young, he has no future. However, if he is still arrogant when he is middle-aged, then he has no future. When I was young, I was much more arrogant than that kid. My Inma clan doesn't have to hide in the dark like a mouse and wear out our spirit. It's not bad to be like this kid." A hint of joy appeared in Mr. Liu's eyes. In the demon Dao, there were not many people that Wei Shuya would say were not bad. It was not easy for Chu Xiu to get such an evaluation. Although this old man was not young anymore, he was still alone and did not even have a disciple or a servant. However, in the Hidden Devil clan, he was one of the 5 great sky demons of the 9th Heaven Mountain. This qualification was enough for him to be at the top of the devil path. Moreover, although the Demon Dao alliance created by the 5 sky demons of the 9 Heavens Mountain was killed, there were many survivors. Those who were able to survive that battle were all strong cultivators in the demon Tao. Their development in the demon Tao was not weak. Now that Wei Shuya had raised his arm and called for help, not all of the disciples of those people were willing to go through fire and water for Wei Shuya. At that moment, in the arena, Chu Xiu had already consecutively defeated several Great Light Temple's ancient martial art practitioners within a short period of time. Furthermore, it was a battle of attrition. It was a completely crushing aura, directly causing the Great Light Temple's ancient martial art practitioners to be terrified. Not a single one of them could withstand more than 10 moves from Chu Xiu. In the end, although there were still a few people from the Great Light Temple who had not entered the arena, they did not jump out to challenge anymore. Instead, they all lowered their heads and looked angry and humiliated. The remaining few people were weaker than the previous people. Their strongest senior brothers had been defeated. What else could they use to fight? Moreover, because it was a continuous battle, Chu Xiu seemed to have consumed a lot of his inner strength and vital qi. If they persisted, they might have a chance. However, they did not choose to make a move. The reason was simple. The ancient martial art practitioners from the Great Light Temple still cared about their reputation. Since they could not defeat Chu Xiu head-on, even if they could defeat him in a continuous battle, the people of the Jianghu would say that the Great Light Temple was bullying him with numbers. They did not want to do something so embarrassing. Therefore, they could only stand there and not dare to make a move. Looking at the disciples' sullen expressions, Su Du mocked them before Su Yin could say anything. I say, you juniors are really something. Can't you take a blow? No matter what, Chu Xiu is 6th on the Longhu leaderboard. Do you really think that the leaderboard that wind-sweeping tower created is a joke? If he could be defeated so easily by you, wouldn't the Great Light Temple be able to claim the top 10 of the Longhu leaderboard? Su Du pointed at Su Yin beside him and said, if you are not convinced, there is still a chance. When you have cultivated to the level of your sect's first seat, you can go and seek revenge on Chu Xiu. Su Yin, who was beside him, nodded. It was not easy for Su Du to say something sensible this time. However, at that moment Su Du added, however, your sect's first seat's abilities are not that great. It will be quite difficult for him to seek revenge when he has cultivated to his level. Su Yin immediately glared at Su Du. However, Su Du turned his head to the side as if he did not see it. The Great Light Temple did not dare to make another move after being beaten up by Chu Xiu. Everyone present had seen Chu Xiu's might. Even those who had a grudge against Chu Xiu did not dare to show up at that moment. At that moment, on the other side, there were only 4 people left. They were Fang Qishao, Chu Xiu, Nie Donglu, and Yin Fian. A duel was a very simple matter. However, 7th young Master Feng looked at Yin Fian opposite him. He shrugged his shoulders helplessly and said, Miss Yin, why don't you just admit defeat? I don't hit women, especially when you are so beautiful and I am so handsome. If the two of us were to fight fiercely here, wouldn't it be a bit of a wet blanket? Why don't you admit defeat, and I will treat you to a meal after this. The Yu Maiden Palace is far away in Wuyue, so you definitely have not tasted the delicacies of the Western region. When we come to the Western region, I will treat you to roasted lamb legs and lamb chops. Oh yes, there will also be good lamb kidneys. That is a great tonic. Last time, I went to a small tribe to rob. Oh no, I borrowed a few holy sheep that were fed with elixirs. TSK, the taste was not ordinary. Everyone present was speechless. This Fang Qishao was really not an ordinary person. Treating Cloud Sword Fairy, Yin Fian, to eat lamb kidneys? Only Fang Qishao could think of such a showy move. The warrior at the Unity of Heaven and Man realm from Sword King City covered his face in pain. He felt that Sword King City's face had been thrown away by Fang Qishao. If it was not for Fang Qishao's unparalleled talent in swordsmanship, he would have been hung on the city tower as a sacrifice several times by the people of Sword King City. On the opposite side, Yin Fian raised her delicate eyebrows. As an outstanding disciple of the 5 major sword sects, she understood Fang Qishao. She knew that he was such a person, so she did not talk nonsense with Fang Qishao. She raised the Yu Maiden sword in her hand and rushed forward. She knew that she was not a match for Fang Qishao, but as a swordsman, she could not take the initiative to admit defeat. The Yu Maiden Palace would not allow her to do so. Chapter 390. Everyone had their own characteristics. Chu Xiu also discovered that Fang Qixiao's characteristic was not that he was talkative or amusing, but that he was narcissistic, extremely narcissistic. If one were to evaluate him sincerely, Fang Qixiao was definitely not ugly, but he was not handsome either. At least, he was not even close to being handsome. He was just an average person. Not to mention Lu Fengxian's appearance, Chu Xiu dared to confidently say that he was definitely much more handsome than Fang Qixiao. But Fang Qixiao himself did not think so. He really thought that his handsomeness could make everyone fall for him. But it was very clear that Yan Fian did not really buy Fang Qixiao's looks. The Yu Maiden sword in her hand was as ethereal as the clouds, and she continuously stabbed towards Fang Qixiao. She was beautiful, and her sword's momentum was even more graceful, so beautiful that it was murderous. Of course, Yan Fian also knew that the reason she could fully use her Yu Maiden sword technique to attack Fang Qixiao was completely because Fang Qixiao did not block or counterattack. Fang Qixiao's own swordsmanship cultivation could be said to be terrifying, and he was a realm higher than Yan Fian. If he really attacked, Yan Fian might not even be able to block 10 of Fang Qixiao's moves. And now Fang Qixiao did not draw his sword. He was just casually dodging. While dodging, Fang Qixiao looked at Yan Fian and said helplessly, "Miss Yan, I said that I don't hit women. You can't beat me, so what's the point of continuing to fight?" Yan Fian frowned and said, "Fang Qixiao, are you insulting me? As a swordsman, if you don't draw your sword when you know you can't win, although it is rational, it is cowardice. Your swordsmanship cultivation is far above mine. Don't you even understand this?" Fang Qixiao muttered in a low voice, "Those who know they can't win are idiots." The Sword King City martial artist was about to go mad with anger. He shouted, "Fang Qixiao, if you don't act now, don't even think about leaving Sword King City for the next year." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, Fang Qixiao shook his head helplessly and said, "Boring, really boring." Although he said it was meaningless, Fang Qixiao's expression turned serious. The mischievous smile on Fang Qixiao's face disappeared completely. The sword that he had been carrying on his back was finally unsheathed. The people of Sword King City were very persistent with their swords. In order to reach the state of being one with the world, most of the disciples of Sword King City kept their swords in their hands even when they were eating or sleeping. They wanted to reach that extreme state of being one with the sword. However, Fang Qixiao was an exception. He carried his sword loosely on his back and wrapped it in a piece of linen. It seemed like he didn't care about it at all. This didn't mean that Fang Qixiao didn't care about his sword. Instead, Fang Qixiao had already reached the state of being one with the sword. The sword was like his fingers and arms. Of course, he would let it go as he pleased. Fang Qixiao's sword was a very simple black long sword. It looked like it was cast from black iron. One could see traces of red on its surface. It looked like rust, but at the same time, it wasn't rust. When the sword slashed out, it seemed like the brilliance between the heavens and the earth was completely enveloped by Fang Qixiao's sword. When the sword came out, there was no sun. An ordinary person would first comprehend the sword's momentum, before comprehending the sword's intent. Finally, they would be able to lay out their own sword path. However, 7th young Master Fang was different. He had already comprehended the true essence of the way of the sword at such a young age. When he slashed out with his sword, it already contained 30% of the charm of the way of the sword. The surrounding power of heaven and earth had already been completely absorbed by 7th young Master Fang's sword. In the darkness, the boundless sword aura enveloped Yan Fian. The aura really made Yan Fian feel terror. Fang Qixiao said that he didn't want to hit a woman. However, as long as he truly drew his sword, that mischievous and seemingly unruly fellow would become one of the most terrifying swordsmen in the world. Yan Fian frowned. The Yu Maiden sword in her hand shone brightly. She had already erupted her power to the extreme. As an outstanding disciple of the younger generation of the 5 major sword sects, Yan Fian and Fang Qixiao knew each other. However, they had never officially fought before. This was because she was still young at that time, while Fang Qixiao had already become famous at a young age. He was already in the top 5 of the Longhu leaderboard. Those who were qualified to compete with him were only elites like Zhang Qingjin of the Celestial Master Abode, and Zhongxian of the Great Light Temple. Therefore, Yanfian knew that Feng Qishao was very strong. However, she had never thought that Feng Qishao would be strong to this extent. The Yu Maiden sword in Yanfian's hand was raised. The sword's radiance drew on the power of the heavens and the earth. Although it was slight, it was extremely sharp and indestructible. The cloud sword Daybreak illuminated 1,000 miles. The Yu Maiden sword mantra's sword momentum was naturally formed. In Yanfian's hands, it was definitely not weak. However, it was a pity that her opponent was Feng Qishao. Feng Qishao had already comprehended the essence of the sword path. The boundless sword aura pressed down and instantly extinguished the cloud sword Daybreak, causing it to no longer be able to change its radiance. The long sword in Feng Qishao's hand pressed down. In an instant, the boundless sword momentum absorbed all the surrounding qi of the heavens and the earth. It turned into a sword aura that was dozens of feet long and fell down. It affected half of the ring, and its power could be said to be astonishing. A martial artist at the unity of heaven and man realm could only draw and borrow some of the power of the heavens and the earth. However, Feng Qishao was using his own sword momentum to draw and move the heavens and the earth. The power created was already second only to that of a martial arts grandmaster. The boundless and huge sword aura suddenly smashed down. Yanfian's figure was pushed back. However, that huge sword aura turned into a sweeping momentum and sealed off all the paths around her, leaving her with nowhere to retreat. The slender Yu Maiden sword in Yanfian's hand suddenly exploded with a boundless sharp sword aura. As her sword momentum flowed, it turned into a sword aura storm. Under Feng Qishao's huge sword aura, she bitterly resisted. Her figure retreated step by step. Finally, after she retreated to the edge of the ring, she was finally able to cancel out this sword attack from Feng Qishao. However, before Yanfian could heave a sigh of relief, Feng Qishao once again struck out with his sword. It was a very simple sword attack. The long sword was raised horizontally and stabbed out. It was the same posture that all martial artists learned when they first learned the sword. It was simple and direct. However, it was such a simple stab that seemed to transcend the boundaries of space and time. Under the trajectory of that sword momentum, all the power was sucked out. The distance between Feng Qishao and Yanfian was rapidly shrinking. However, Yanfian did not move. Instead, her eyes revealed a deep sense of shock. When Feng Qishao stabbed out with his sword, he did not slash a person, nor did he slash heaven and earth, but karma. From the moment the sword stabbed out, stabbing Yanfian was the effect, and the process of the sword was the cause. There must be an effect before there could be a cause. This completely illogical way of the sword was comprehended by Feng Qishao. No matter what Yanfian did to resist, she would still lose. Just when Feng Qishao's sword was less than 10 feet away from her, Yanfian took a step back and fell off the ring. With a disappointed expression, she said, "I've lost." At the last moment, Yanfian still retreated because there was no difference between retreating and not retreating. She was destined to be unable to withstand this sword attack. 3 moves. Feng Qishao only used 3 moves to defeat Yanfian. They were both in the top 10 of the Dragon and Tiger roll, but the gap was so big that it was shocking. Everyone present was also silent. The feeling that Feng Qishao gave people was really too divisive, and they could not react at all. Previously, Feng Qishao always gave people a feeling of being silly and unreliable. He did not have the slightest aura of a young powerhouse. This also made most people feel that he did not live up to his name. But now that Feng Qishao became serious and really attacked, everyone finally knew how terrifying Feng Qishao was. At the same time, they could not help but think, if Feng Qishao was so terrifying, then how terrifying were Zhang Qingjin and Zhongxian, who were ranked first and second on the Dragon and Tiger roll? Could it be that they were comparable to martial Dao grandmasters? After defeating Yanfian in 3 moves, Feng Qishao put away the long sword in his hand and returned to his mischievous appearance. He said with a smile, "Miss Yan, I told you to take the initiative to admit defeat. That way, everyone can save energy. But don't worry, I, Feng Qishao, am a man of my word. Just now, I said that I would treat you to a meal, so I will definitely treat you to a meal. When do you have time? Let's meet in the western regions." Yan Fian took a deep look at Fang Qixiao and did not say a word. She turned and left directly. Looking at Yan Fian's back, Fang Qixiao rubbed his chin and muttered, "What does this mean? Did she agree or reject? TSK, women are really difficult to understand. They are even more difficult to understand than Sword Dao." At this moment, on the high platform of floating Jade Mountain, the martial Dao Grandmaster from Sword King City, whose entire body was shrouded in a white robe, said to the others in a proud tone, "Everyone, what do you think of my Sword King City's disciples? Nowadays, the Buddhist sects and Taoist sects dominate the world. In my Sword Dao lineage, only Sword King City's Fang Qixiao can stand shoulder to shoulder with the young disciples of the Buddhist sects and Taoist sects." The beautiful woman from the Yu Palace had an ugly expression. After all, it was someone from the Yu Palace who had lost. Although she also knew that this matter could not be blamed on Yan Fian. It was not that Yan Fian was weak, but that Fang Qixiao was too freakishly strong. A loss was a loss. She could not find any excuses. The villa master of Hidden Sword Villa, Cheng Tingshan, could not help but ridicule. He was just lucky. It's your Sword King City's luck to have a Sword Dao genius like Fang Qixiao. He wasn't nurtured by your Sword King City. The martial Dao Grandmaster from Sword King City stood with his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "That may be the case, but can you protect Fang Qixiao if I give him to your Hidden Sword Villa? Only my Sword King City can accommodate Fang Qixiao." When he said that, the martial Dao Grandmaster from Sword King City carried a hint of arrogance. In fact, the Sword King City did have a reason to be arrogant. With Fang Qixiao's personality and mouth, it could be said that he had offended everyone along the way. His actions were also extremely unreliable. Only the Sword King City had the strength to protect Fang Qixiao, allowing him to grow steadily to his current realm. It was true that 90% of Fang Qixiao's current cultivation level was due to his own talent, but the remaining 10% was the protection that the Sword King City had given to Fang Qixiao. Without this protection, a fallen Sword Dao genius would no longer be a genius, but a dead person. Chapter 391. Fang Qixiao had defeated Yan Fian of the Yu Palace in 3 moves. This was no longer a one-sided suppression, but a battle between two people of different levels. Mr. Lu of the Phaseless Demon Sect had a serious look in his eyes. There were crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the righteous sects, and they were indeed stronger than the diabolism. Mr. Lu himself had already reached the realm of half-step Grandmaster. As long as he was given an opportunity, he was confident that he could immediately step into the realm of martial arts Grandmaster. However, if Mr. Lu were to fight with Fang Qixiao now, he was not confident that he could defeat Fang Qixiao. On the other hand, on the side of the diabolism, Chu Xiu of the Yinma clan was not bad, but Chu Xiu was only at the realm of 5 Qis collecting in origin, and had not reached the realm of oneness of heaven and man. Mr. Lu did not know if Chu Xiu could defeat Fang Qixiao. There was also Yi Tianxia of the Bright Demon clan. He had refined the inner elixir of the Blood Flood Dragon, and successfully cultivated the Heart Sutra of the Blood Flood Dragon as a human. He was not easy to deal with, but he had not reached the realm of oneness of heaven and man. The martial artists of diabolism were on the wane. People like Chu Xiu and Yi Tianxia were already considered to be at the top. However, when looking at the righteous sects, especially the Taoist and Buddhist sects, both Zhang Qingjin and Zhong Xian were outstanding figures that were hard to come by in 1,000 years. Compared to them, the disadvantage of diabolism was really not small. At this time, Wei Shiya, who was standing next to Mr. Lu, seemed to have sensed his thoughts. He transmitted his voice, "Lu Jin, don't be so pessimistic. No orthodoxy can always be strong. The general trend of the world has its ups and downs. Because of the rise of the Kunlun devil cult, our diabolism has been glorious for hundreds of years. Although we are now at a low point, who dares to say that we will always be at a low point? As long as the diabolism is not destroyed, there will always be a chance for us to rise again." Since ancient times, the only orthodoxies that could truly stand at the pinnacle were Taoism, Buddhism, and devil. Now, this bunch of swordsmen want to stir up trouble when they see that our devil Tao is on the decline. They are still far from it. Mr. Lu nodded. Perhaps it was precisely because there were countless people like Wei Shuya in the diabolism that they could continue to survive in this environment where the diabolism was suppressed to the extreme. In the past, Prince Anil had once asked Mr. Liu, "The Kunlun devil cult has been destroyed for hundreds of years. What's the point of persisting in these things?" At that time, Mr. Liu did not answer. Perhaps to Mr. Liu and the current phaseless demon sect, their loyalty was not to the Kunlun devil cult, but to the flourishing age of the devil path. At that moment in the arena, the match between Fang Qishao and Yan Fian had ended. Everyone was looking at Chu Xiao and Ye Donglu. The truly interesting match was between these two. Chu Xiao and Ye Donglu could be said to be old rivals and enemies. The grudge between them was recorded on the Longhu leaderboard. It was not something that happened in a day or two. However, Nye Donglu and Chu Xiao never saw each other again. However, the grudge between them had not been put down. Nye Donglu became famous at a young age. He was also a person with great luck. His father, Nye Renlong, had left a strong reputation for him. Just the reputation of the morgue was enough for him to benefit from. After that, Nye Donglu became the disciple of the Northern Yen martial arts tycoon, Han Baxian, and received all the teachings of Han Baxian. With the teachings of two martial arts masters on the Wind Cloud leaderboard, it could be considered as making up for some of the shortcomings in his own strength. On the other hand, Chu Xiao's experience was even more legendary. From a wandering martial artist to a ruthless killer of the Blue Dragon Society, he then entered the Guanzhong torture room and became the Guanxi penal officer in a short period of time. He held great power in his hands. This kind of resume was enough to look down on the entire Jianghu. So overall, Chu Xiao and Ye Donglio's growth was completely different. One was the standard elite of an aristocratic family and had a genius history of growing up with great luck. On the other hand, Chu Xiao had a standard background in the wilderness. With a sword and a saber, he had fought his way through a storm of blood to reach his current realm and achievements. It was hard to say who was stronger between the two, but because of the grudge between Ye Donglu and Chu Xiao, the two would have to fight it out in the end. This also made the people present a little excited, and they were ready to watch a good show. In fact, now that Fang Qishao was fully deserving of the first place, it didn't matter who was second or third. If it were someone else, it might just be a spar and be done with it. But now that it was Chu Xiao and Nye Donglu, with the grudge between them, it was obviously not so easy to settle. Nye Donglu looked at Chu Xiao and said with a smile, "Brother Chu, you just went through a few big battles. Do you want to rest for a while? Don't worry, I won't take advantage of you." As he said that, Nye Donglu stretched out his hand and pointed, making a magnanimous gesture. The grudge between Chu Xiao and Nye Donglu had long been formed, but in reality, he hadn't had many interactions with Nye Donglu. However, regardless of whether it was Chu Xiao or Nye Donglu, they had all heard a lot about each other from others. Chu Xiao's evaluation of Nye Donglu was very simple. He was a scheming person. Even an ordinary sentence from him usually contains several meanings. Just like now, Nye Donglu had asked Chu Xiao to rest on the surface, but under the current situation, could Chu Xiao really rest? Fang Qishao had already smoothly dealt with Yan Fian. Only Chu Xiao was left to fight with Nye Donglu again. There were so many warriors on Floating Jade Mountain watching, and there were also martial arts masters from various sects waiting at the side. Could a junior warrior like Chu Xiao really go to the side to rest and recover his vital qi before making a move? There were so many people watching him. Chu Xiao, recover his strength alone? Even if Chu Xiao was thick-skinned enough to ignore the gazes of these people and recover his vital qi, people would still label Chu Xiao as a timid and cautious person. Although it wasn't a derogatory term, it was still not something good. If Chu Xiao couldn't take the provocation and made a move now, it would be in line with Nye Donglio's intentions. He was a hypocrite, but he was also a real villain. Hanba first taught him that the easiest way to solve problems was to solve them with one's own fists. His father, Nye Renlong, also taught him that the winner takes all. As long as you can defeat your enemy, using any means is reasonable. Nye Donglu didn't have the confidence to win against Chu Xiao at his peak, but now that he was facing Chu Xiao, who had expended a lot of energy, Nye Donglu still had some confidence. In any case, no matter what Chu Xiu chose, Nie Donglu would be the one to benefit. Looking at Nie Donglu, Chu Xiu said lightly, Nie Donglu, you're still the same. Although you've become Hanba's disciple, you haven't learned his domineering ways. Nie Donglu smiled and said, Domineering ways? I don't need that kind of thing for now. My master walks the path of dominance, and I walk the path of the king. Can't I? Chu Xiu laughed coldly when he heard that. Nie Donglu, you really are full of yourself. Walk the path of the king? You're just a young master of the memorial hall. Do you still think you're a northern Yen prince? Nie Donglu's words were indeed arrogant. The memorial hall's strength wasn't considered the top among the people and the 6 gangs. Yet he still dared to say he wanted to walk the path of the king? Do the nobles and generals have guts? Nie Donglu stood with his hands behind his back and said lightly, Chu Xiu, you were born in the wilderness, and now you don't even have the courage to do so? Chu Xiu raised the sky demon dance in his hand and pointed it at Nie Donglu. He said in a deep voice, That's not bad. However, between the two of us, you are the one who looks more like a king. Don't you think that's a little inauspicious? Nie Renlong was a standard peasant, but Nie Donglu wasn't. The young master of the memorial hall was not a peasant, no matter where he was. Of course, Chu Xiu couldn't be bothered to waste time with Nie Donglu. Since Nie Donglu believed in his so-called way of the king, then Chu Xiu would teach him a lesson. Whether it was the way of the king or the way of dominance, it all had to be carried out with one's fists and the knife in one's hand. Demonic aura gathered on the sky demon dance. The demonic aura was so dense that it had even condensed into the shadow of a demon god on the blade, making people feel abnormally terrified. Seeing this, Han Tingyi and the other people from the 5 major sword sects frowned. It was not because of anything else, but because Chu Xiu's demonic art was too eye-catching. In fact, there was nothing strange about demonic arts. In Jianghu, the martial arts of Taoism, Buddhism, and Diabolism were the most widely spread, especially the martial arts of Diabolism. Although there were flaws such as rapid learning, unstable foundation, and excessive killing, the power of demonic arts was very strong, especially when used as a trump card when fighting for one's life. Therefore, even some righteous martial artists actually secretly practiced demonic arts as a trump card. However, this was the World Sword Sect Conference, and the goal of the 5 major sword sects was to target the demonic arts. Now that Chu Xiu revealed his demonic arts, they couldn't help but be sensitive. If Chu Xiu didn't come from the Guanzhong torture room, had a clean background, and had so many Buddhist techniques, Chu Xiu would have been invited to have tea by now. At this moment, Chu Xiu's devil saber had slashed down, and the fiend god's image that had been condensed from his saber's aura had warped as well. Along with Chu Xiu's saber, a wave of sonic booms resounded. The devil saber that was born from the hell of Avicii had been utilized to its limits by Chu Xiu, and a form of divinity had even appeared when his saber descended. In the face of Chu Xiu's stunning blade, Nie Donglu didn't block it directly. Instead, he retreated first, preparing to use it to hold Chu Xiu back. Chu Xiu's only advantage was his own combat power. However, Chu Xiu's previous battles with the Great Light Temple's martial artists had exhausted nearly half of his inner strength. Nie Donglu didn't believe that Chu Xiu could still control such a powerful explosive power. Therefore, he planned to hold it back until Chu Xiu was truly exhausted. Unfortunately, Chu Xiu's moves were always quick. If Nie Donglu wanted to hold Chu Xiu back, he would have to see if he had enough strength. When Chu Xiu's blade fell, the vital energy defense Nie Donglu set up was like paper in front of Chu Xiu. It was easily torn apart by Chu Xiu's blade. At this moment, Nie Donglu stretched out a hand and pressed it directly on Chu Xiu's long blade. Earth energy exploded, and the demonic flames were instantly extinguished. Memorial Manor's secret technique. Heaven and Earth Cloud Hand. Chapter 392. Although Nie Donglu had a great reputation in the Jianghu, he had not really fought many times. He had always been famous for his scheming, which was why he was ranked in the top 10 of the Longhu leaderboard. Now, after years of painstaking cultivation and becoming Han Baxian's disciple, everyone finally saw Nie Donglu's true strength. Heaven and earth above the clouds, grasping the world. The powerful palm power rippled out layer by layer, tearing apart the demonic aura on Chu Xiu's heavenly demon dance, and attacking Chu Xiu along the blade. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Nie Donglio's accumulated strength was not weak, and the gathering loyalty manner's secret heaven and earth above the cloud's hand was really strange. It grasped the universe, and any gang qi power that was caught by the heaven and earth above the cloud's hand would be torn apart by the strange ripples. However, in terms of pure strength, Chu Xiu had never been afraid of anyone. The boundless demonic aura on the heavenly demon dance combined with the demonic aura, and Chu Xiu's eyes also turned red in an instant. In an instant, Chu Xiu had already stepped into the state of selflessness. Demonic aura shot up to the sky, and demonic flame swept out. The long blade broke free from Nie Donglio's grasp, and with a surging momentum, it slashed at Nie Donglu. The boundless demonic aura combined with the demonic aura condensed into a hideous shadow of a demon god around Chu Xiu. As Chu Xiu's blade slashed down, it let out a shrill wail of evil spirits. Nie Donglio's figure retreated quickly, and his expression changed slightly. The reason why he had the confidence to fight Chu Xiu was because Chu Xiu had previously gone through the Temple of Great Light's continuous battles against several 5 Chi's origin realm experts who were not weak. He had already expended a large portion of his inner energy, but who would have thought that Chu Xiu would still be able to unleash such a level of power? Just how deep was Chu Xiu's accumulation? Nie Donglio's hands danced in succession. The heaven and earth cloud-reaching hands, which had originally seemed fierce and imposing, now became profound and soft. Yin and Yang, the two extremes of Yin and Yang, the heaven and earth, the two completely different powers fluctuated between Nie Donglio's hands, dividing and canceling out Chu Xiu's violent saber force. However, at this moment, the killing intent in Chu Xiu's eyes receded and a mysterious aura appeared around him. The trajectory of Nie Donglio's heaven and earth cloud hand was within Chu Xiu's grasp. Heaven's sun gazing at air. In the past, Chu Xiu could not use the heaven's sun gazing at air in such an intense fight. But recently, although Chu Xiu's cultivation of the heaven's sun gazing at air had not improved, he had become much more familiar with it. Just like now, he could concentrate his mental strength to the extreme in battle, and use the heaven's sun gazing at air. The heaven and earth cloud hand, a secret technique passed down in honor manner, was very strange. It could be both hard and soft. Just like just now, it could shatter Chu Xiu's blade power head-on. Now, it could split heaven and earth and block Chu Xiu's evil blood blade power. However, in the eyes of Chu Xiu's heaven's sun gazing at air, Nie Donglio's next attack trajectory was already clear to him. Chu Xiu's blade power slowed down, but it was no longer continuous like a violent storm. Instead, he stared at the trajectory of Nie Donglio's attack. The moment Nie Donglio's heaven and earth cloud hand was about to be used, he blocked his opponent's attack trajectory and completely disrupted his rhythm. After more than 10 strikes, Nie Donglio's heaven and earth cloud hand's trajectory had been completely disrupted by Chu Xiu. This made him so frustrated that he almost vomited blood. Every move of his actually seemed to be taking the initiative to collide with Chu Xiu's saber intent. He was completely unable to execute the heaven and earth cloud-reaching hands formation. This kind of situation was simply strange to the extreme. It was just like how his father had fed him moves when they were sparring in battle. If one didn't cultivate the heaven and earth cloud-reaching hand to the extreme, it was simply impossible to do this. However, Nie Donglu was certain that the Nie family's heaven and earth cloud hand would never be leaked. Tribute Village's heaven and earth cloud hand was created by Nie Renlong based on some ancient techniques he had obtained in the past. In the entire Tribute Village, only he and his father Nie Renlong knew of it, so there was absolutely no possibility of the secret being leaked. Nie Donglu did not know what was going on with Chu Xiu. However, seeing that Chu Xiu's blade power was getting stronger and stronger, and the blade power was getting fiercer and fiercer, constantly approaching him, Nie Donglu snorted. His body suddenly exploded with a blinding golden light, as if the sun had descended upon him. He punched out, illuminating the world. The Northern Yin martial arts tycoon Han Bashian practiced the vast Yang Nine Extremes mysterious skill, which could be considered a half-self-created martial art. In the past, Han Bashian first practiced the body-refining skill that he had exchanged with the Northern Yin imperial court. However, Han Baxian later became obsessed with martial arts and combined the 9 body refining skills that he had obtained from various places. After they were combined, it became the Vast Yang 9 Extremes Mysterious Skill. The Vast Yang 9 Extremes Mysterious Skill was ferocious and domineering. It was not only a body refining skill, but also a mysterious skill that accumulated a lot of inner strength. Moreover, Han Baxian had also integrated his own martial arts moves into it, making it even more powerful when used together. Previously, Han Baxian used weapons. He was from the Northern Yan military, so he naturally used heavy weapons. He had used guns, halberd, and even the green dragon crescent blade. However, Han Baxian later discovered that no weapon was as practical as his pair of iron fists. He gave up on weapons and used his fists to fight his enemies. However, he also integrated his use of weapons into the Vast Yang 9 Extremes Mysterious Skill, just like the punch that Nie Donglu threw. The light of the Vast Yang Sun shrouded him, but in reality, it was a heavy hammer. It was heavy and powerful, with infinite power. The dazzling light collided with Chu Xiu's blade. The light of the Vast Yang Scorching Sun burst out in an instant, eventually tangling with the devil qi and dissipating. Violent gang qi burst out, and even the ring shook twice. That was not all. Nie Donglio's figure did not stop at all. He stood straight and threw a punch. It was like a straight spear, bursting forth with unparalleled momentum. Its speed was extremely fast, and it was also extremely ferocious. Seeing Nie Donglio's actions, Chu Xiu's lips curled into a cold smile. Did Nie Donglu want to fight in close combat with him? Unfortunately, ever since Chu Xiu cultivated the Great Vajra divine powers, he no longer had any weaknesses. Even in close combat, Chu Xiu's accumulated inner force and the physical strength brought by the Great Vajra divine powers were no weaker than Nie Donglu, who cultivated the Vast Yang 9 Extremes Mysterious Skill. He sheathed his blade and formed a seal. Among the complicated hand seals, majestic gang qi spread out. The Wisdom Fist seal, useless in heaven and earth. The area within a radius of more than 30 meters became Chu Xiu's gang qi domain. Nie Donglio's punch crashed into the gang qi domain, like a spear piercing into sticky water, its momentum waning again and again. The spear focused on momentum, and after piercing out, it moved forward with indomitable will. However, under Chu Xiu's Wisdom Fist seal, this momentum had already dissipated, and its power was reduced by half. Stepping forward, Chu Xiu formed a complete Aquarius seal in his hand. In an instant, a dazzling light burst out and collided with Nie Donglio's punch, instantly forcing him to take a step back. Stepping forward again, Chu Xiu formed a Sunwill seal in his hand. The 5 elements rotated into one, growing and multiplying endlessly. A powerful gang qi burst out, forcing Nie Donglu to take another step back. Chu Xiu's body was surrounded by golden Buddhist light. One after another, Buddhist mudras landed. Their power was incomparably ferocious. They were actually suppressing Nie Donglu. The power was several times stronger than when Nie Donglu had unleashed the Vast Yang 9 Extremes Mysterious Skill. Everyone present had a strange look on their faces. Nie Donglu was looking for trouble. After all, Chu Xiu had fought several times in the Jianghu, and everyone knew a little about his martial arts. When it came to power, there were few warriors of the same level who could compare with Chu Xiu. Of course, Nie Donglu could only blame his bad luck. He had finally become Han Baxian's disciple and raised his cultivation to the extreme. He did not expect to meet such a monster like Chu Xiu. Even after fighting several battles, he could still burst out with power of this level. Some of the monks from the Great Light Temple below also had ugly expressions, because that was how Chu Xiu had treated them previously. He had unleashed a barrage of attacks without any reason, completely crushing them in terms of power. He had completely overwhelmed them and finally blasted them off the arena. However, Nie Donglu was obviously not one of those monks from the Great Light Temple. After being suppressed by Chu Xiu for several moves, Nie Donglio's eyes revealed a cold look. He had underestimated Chu Xiu this time. After not seeing him for so long, his luck was not bad, but Chu Xiu's growth was even more terrifying. If this continued, he was afraid that before he could exhaust Chu Xiu to death, he would be crushed and defeated by Chu Xiu in public. It was not that Nie Donglu could not accept failure. In fact, he had lost many times in his life. Previously, he lost to a woman, and he was even ridiculed by the warriors of the Northern Yan for a long time. But now, in the World Sword Sect Conference, under the watchful eyes of everyone, if he was crushed and defeated by Chu Xiu like this, it would be a huge blow to Nie Donglu's reputation. So at this moment, Nie Donglu had already made up his mind to fight. Victory or defeat was right in front of him. Although he was full of schemes, he would not hesitate after calculating. Instead, he was extremely decisive. Since he had decided to fight, he no longer worried about being injured or holding back. Before Chu Xiu's fist landed, a blood mist rose around Nie Donglu's body. He had actually burned his blood essence, which made everyone's eyebrows twitch. Burning blood essence, a method that hurt others and oneself, was usually only used when it came to a life-or-death situation. Now that Nie Donglu had even used this method in the ring, it was obvious that he was really angry and had been forced to the extreme. Han Ting, who was the referee on the high platform, wanted to intervene when he saw this scene. However, he resisted the urge. Anyway, it was already the last 2 rounds. If they wanted to fight, then let them fight. Anyway, it did not affect the overall situation. The goal of the 5 major sword sects was diabolism, not to be a mediator between these junior warriors. Chapter 393. Seeing that Nie Donglu was even willing to burn his blood essence, Chu Xiu could not help but frown and take 2 steps back. Nie Donglu's desire to win was not ordinary. It was just a competition in the ring, and Han Tingyi and the others were watching. He could not really kill anyone, so why would he risk his life? Of course, for Chu Xiu, he still had the chance to kill someone, but not now, but in the future. But now that Nie Donglu had decided to go all out, how could he let Chu Xiu leave so easily? Thick blood essence gathered in Nie Donglu's arms. He pointed out with his fingers, and in an instant 2 blood swords slashed out. But the strangest thing was that the 2 blood swords were wrapped in a thick layer of golden vigor. The 2 blood swords were like 2 dragons, twisting agilely and tearing apart all the vigor around Chu Xiu as they slashed towards him. The 2 blood swords condensed from Nie Donglu's blood essence and vigor were not strange, but they could be said to be magical. Even if Chu Xiu attacked with all his might, he would not be able to completely block them. The vigor was torn apart by the 2 blood swords. Chu Xiu held the Duga seal in his hand, unmoving like a mountain, and invincible. When the 2 blood swords collided with the Duga seal, blood essence exploded and golden light filled the air, directly shattering Chu Xiu's Duga seal. Nie Donglu's face was pale, but his speed did not change in the slightest. Just as Chu Xiu's Duga seal was shattered, he had already closed in. Actually, the 2 blood swords were not taught to him by Han Baxian, nor was it taught by his father, Nie Renlong. It was an incomplete sword technique that Nie Donglu accidentally obtained. This sword technique originated from the Devil Dao, and the power of the complete version was unimaginable. After Nie Donglu accidentally obtained this sword technique, he gave it to his father, Nie Renlong. In the end, Nie Renlong came to the conclusion that the owner of this sword technique should have been from the Kunlun devil cult. It was very likely that he was a devil emissary, or even a devil lord of the Kunlun devil cult. However, the damage to the sword technique was too great. Even if Nie Renlong had taken action, he could only extract this move from it. Using one's vital energy and blood as the marrow, essential energy as the bones, and astral energy as the skin, the power of these 2 swords were extremely powerful. Even Chu Xiu's Dugu Yin would not be able to withstand an attack of this level. Nie Donglu stepped on a golden light, and his entire body was covered in a powerful vigor. When he punched, his aura was raised to the extreme, as if it had the power to shatter a mountain. In the beginning, Nie Donglu had wanted to exhaust Chu Xiu to death. After all, Chu Xiu had already used up a lot of energy. However, in the end, Nie Donglu realized that Chu Xiu had accumulated a terrifying amount of energy. Even after the consecutive battles, Chu Xiu's accumulation was even more profound than his. So if they continued fighting like this, it would not be Chu Xiu who would be exhausted to death, but Nie Donglu himself. So Nie Donglu could only change his strategy. He attacked with all his strength and unleashed his greatest power to defeat Chu Xiu. Looking at Nye Donglu, who was like a god descending to the world, Chu Xiu's eyes turned red. The Duga seal had been shattered. Although the power of the two blood swords had been mostly neutralized, there was still a portion of the power that had seeped into Chu Xiu's internal organs, causing his meridians to feel some pain. But at this moment, Chu Xiu had already stepped into the selfless killing realm. Killing intent and baleful aura condensed around him, and things like pain were directly ignored by Chu Xiu. There was only a single word in his mind: kill. As he punched out, the murderous aura around Chu Xiu condensed into a crimson color. It was so red that it shone brightly and was a dazzling red. Forgetting heaven, forgetting earth, forgetting heaven, forgetting killing fist. The punch, condensed to the extreme, collided with Nye Donglu. When the two fists collided, a terrifying wave erupted. The faces of the other cultivators turned pale as well. It was not because of the aura that erupted when the two of them exchanged blows, but because of the terrifying killing intent from Chu Xiu's annihilating heaven and earth extinguishing oblivion killing fist. The forgetting heaven, forgetting killing fist was very famous in the Jianghu. It was not just one or two people who practiced it. Many warriors in the Eastern Qi military had actually practiced this martial art. However, those people were all powerful warriors in the military. It was easy for them to condense this level of killing intent in battle, and then use this martial art. But Chu Xiu was different. He was just a Jianghu man, and he came from a Jianghu background. Only God knew how he could condense this level of killing intent. If Chu Xiu had not represented the Guanzhong torture room, he would not have felt the slightest bit out of place if someone called him a devil. At that moment, in the arena, Nye Donglu's punch, which could be said to be the pinnacle of power, was blocked by Chu Xiu. This made Nye Donglu gnash his teeth in hatred. Whether or not Chu Xiu's strength was exhausted aside, Nye Donglu himself had expended a lot of energy. Despite going all out, Nye Donglu was unable to shake Chu Xiu, and this was only because he had taken advantage of Chu Xiu's perilous state. Even after Chu Xiu had been taken on in succession, he was still powerless. This made Nye Donglu feel helpless. He finally understood what his master Han Baxian meant. In the face of absolute power, everything else was nothing. Even though he was full of schemes, he still lost in the end. Nye Donglu was not a sore loser. In fact, he was very rational. After feeling that he could not beat Chu Xiu even if he used his last trump card, Nye Donglu immediately prepared to retreat. Unfortunately, Chu Xiu did not want to give him this chance. The moment Nye Donglu retreated, Chu Xiu moved as well. However, Chu Xiu did not move. He formed a seal with his hands, and as his fingers tapped, there was an explosion of thunder. Outer Lion Seal. It was like the roar of thunder. Nye Donglu was not prepared at all, and his earth energy dissipated by Chu Xiu's Outer Lion Seal. Blood flowed from his ears. However, the Outer Lion Seal had a limited effect on Nye Donglu. After all, his physical cultivation was still there. After cultivating the vast Yang 9 Extreme's mysterious skill, his physical strength still had a certain degree of defense against martial arts like the Outer Lion Seal. But before Nye Donglu could react, Chu Xiu's eyes had already turned into a bottomless abyss, pulling Nye Donglu's entire mind into it. Extinguishing sky, destroying earth, soul-shifting technique. Secret mental techniques were definitely a minority type in the Jianghu, and those that were related to them were all described as evil and ruthless. Chu Xiu's martial arts had always been firm, fierce, and imposing. Now he had suddenly used a mental secret technique. Not only did Nye Donglu not react, but everyone present also did not react in time. Originally, with Nye Donglu's physical cultivation and strong qi and blood, he still had a certain degree of resistance against secret mental techniques. However, he had used a secret technique to burn his blood essence, causing his blood essence to be depleted. Now he was hit in an instant. His mind fell into a bottomless abyss. Nye Donglu struggled with all his might, and his mental strength was almost stretched to the limit. However, just as he broke free from the influence of the soul-shifting skill, what greeted him was a punch from Chu Xiu. It was the annihilating heaven and earth destroying oblivion killing fist with infinite murderous intent. Han Tingyi frowned. They could really fight in the ring, but they could not allow anyone to die. So he was already prepared to stop them. However, Nie Donglu still had the strength to fight. At the critical moment, he directly exploded all his Gang Qi, condensing it into a shield in front of him. The golden Gang Qi shield was directly shattered by Chu Xiu's punch, and Nie Donglu was also blasted off the ring by Chu Xiu's punch. He spat out large mouthfuls of blood, but his life was clearly not in danger. Seeing this, Han Tingyi did not continue to attack. Looking at Chu Xiu, who was panting a little but not too injured in the ring, Nie Donglio's heart was filled with unwillingness, but he still wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and returned to his seat. He was not someone who could not afford to lose. At this moment, Nie Donglu also understood that he was still the young master of the Memorial Manor, but Chu Xiu was no longer the Chu Xiu of the past. In the past, Nie Donglio's strength was superior to Chu Xiu's, but now he was crushed by Chu Xiu even though he had resorted to trickery. He had lost completely. At that time, Chu Xiu had no backing. He was just a lone cultivator that Nie Donglu could casually crush to death. Now Chu Xiu had the support of the Guanzhong torture room, and had become the Guanzhong penal officer with great power. Although his status was still not as high as the heir of the Memorial Manor, he was not someone he could casually crush. After all, in terms of power, the Guanzhong torture room was much stronger than the Memorial Manor. Of course, what Nie Donglu did not know was that Chu Xiu had more than just the Guanzhong torture room behind him. The power hidden beneath was something that Nie Donglu did not even dare to think about. Of course, Nie Donglu also regretted not forcing his father to use the power of the Memorial Manor to kill Chu Xiu. However, regret was the most useless emotion. This emotion only flashed in Nie Donglio's heart for a moment before he forcibly extinguished it. No one present was surprised that Chu Xiu had defeated Nie Donglu. On the contrary, to most people, this was a very normal thing. To the people of the Jianghu, the reason why Chu Xiu was able to make a name for himself on the Longhu list was because he had fought through many bloody battles. The people of the Jianghu could say that Chu Xiu was vicious, and that he was ruthless. However, no one would say that Chu Xiu did not live up to his reputation, and was not worthy of his ranking on the Longhu list. This was a kind of confidence, a confidence obtained from countless bloody battles and slaughters. On the other hand, Nie Donglio's reputation was actually not weaker than Chu Xiu's. In fact, it was even greater than Chu Xiu's. After all, Chu Xiu was only the penal officer of Guangdong, and not the definite successor of the Guanzhong torture room. However, everyone in the Jianghu knew that Nie Donglu was the successor of the Memorial Manor. As long as Nie Donglu did not die, he would definitely take over the Memorial Manor in the future. Therefore, Nie Donglu actually had the halo of the entire Memorial Manor. Without this identity, Nie Donglio's reputation would definitely be far inferior to Chu Xiu's. Now that the two of them were fighting, most people had already expected that the winner would most likely be Chu Xiu. Now that they looked at it, it was just as they had expected. Now that the arena had reached this stage, it was more or less enough. With Feng Qixiao's strength and realm, he fully deserved to be number 1. Chu Xiu was number 2, and Nie Donglu was number 3. There was no need to continue fighting. Chu Xiu could also go down and heal his injuries now. Therefore, Han Tingyi just asked a routine question. Chu Xiu, do you still want to fight? Just when everyone thought that Chu Xiu would definitely take the initiative to admit defeat, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Of course I want to fight. Why wouldn't I? I don't have the habit of admitting defeat." Feng Qixiao, who was standing at the side, said helplessly, "Brother Chu, you still want to fight when you are already in this state? Don't tell me that you and that woman from the Yunnu Palace are also like a fairy. Why are you talking about the dignity of a swordsman? Besides, you are using a saber, not a sword." Chapter 394. Feng Qixiao's words made all the saber-wielding martial artists very unhappy. A swordsman needed dignity, but a saber-wielder did not? However, as the matter stood, what Feng Qixiao said did make some sense. Now, not to mention that Chu Xiu had overexerted himself. Even if Chu Xiu recovered to his peak, he would still not be able to defeat Feng Qixiao. Since that was the case, What was the point of continuing to pester him? Looking at Fang Qixiao, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Dignity is something that you fight for yourself, not something that you can just talk about. The only reason I want to fight again is because I'm not used to admitting defeat." Seeing that Chu Xiu was so insistent, Fang Qixiao shrugged and said indifferently, "As long as you're happy." Although he was too lazy to make a move, Fang Qixiao felt that it would not take long to finish off Chu Xiu. Based on Chu Xiu's current state, he might be able to finish off Chu Xiu in less than 3 moves. However, although Fang Qixiao was a little unreliable, he was still a kind person. Before he made a move, he specially asked, "Do you need to recover your strength?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "No need, this is enough." Fang Qixiao shrugged and said, "All right, I won't stand on ceremony then." As he said that, Fang Qixiao's hand was already on his sword. At the same time, Fang Qixiao's seemingly mischievous expression turned serious. Fang Qixiao was a very split person. His usual state and the state he was in when he held his sword were two different people. Fang Qixiao had seen the power of Chu Xiu's attack just now. He had to admit that Chu Xiu was indeed not weak, but that was all. There was a big realm difference between them, and Chu Xiu could not beat him. However, even if Fang Qixiao was confident that he could defeat Chu Xiu, even if Chu Xiu had consumed most of his strength, Fang Qixiao still had to show his serious attitude when facing an opponent like Chu Xiu. If Fang Qixiao was not serious, he would probably lose face in front of Chu Xiu. The seemingly ordinary sword in Fang Qixiao's hand was unsheathed and stabbed out. The karma rotated. His person, his sword, and Chu Xiu seemed to have a strange connection. It was extremely magical. As soon as the fight started, Fang Qixiao used the strongest karma swordsmanship that he could master. He also planned to end the battle with Chu Xiu quickly, and then go back to rest. This move was not a sword technique, but had risen to the level of swordsmanship. Therefore, except for martial Dao masters, the people below could not understand it. Although they also felt that Fang Qixiao was somewhat mysterious, it was obvious to them that the current Fang Qixiao was not as powerful as when he fought with Yan Fian, where the sword aura spanned more than 30 meters and swept away everything. At this time, in the face of Fang Qixiao's sword, Chu Xiu's eyes revealed a faint excitement. Although Chu Xiu knew that he was no match for Fang Qixiao, he insisted on fighting Fang Qixiao. He did it for the sake of Fang Qixiao's sword. Chu Xiu's mental strength rose to the extreme, and even his eyes became extremely empty. If one looked closely, one could even see the sun, moon, and stars rotating in Chu Xiu's eyes. The heaven's sun gazing at air skill was performed to the extreme by Chu Xiu. Ordinary people only saw the sword that Fang Qixiao stabbed out casually, but what Chu Xiu saw was the powerful karma power. Fang Qixiao's swordsmanship had an effect first, and then there would be a cause. This was a sword that was almost certain to hit its target. Other than forcefully resisting it, no one could break it. Even the grandmasters of swordsmanship in the past had never heard of such a strange swordsmanship. Only God knew how Fang Qixiao had comprehended it. However, Chu Xiu's heaven's sun gazing at air skill was the opposite of Fang Qixiao's swordsmanship. What he saw was the cause, and what he affected was the effect. Even if it was a sword that was certain to hit its target, Chu Xiu could see the trajectory of the sword, and then he could predict whether to dodge or counterattack. It could be said that what Chu Xiu saw with the heaven's sun gazing at air skill was the future, and it could be considered a type of karma. Therefore, when Fang Qixiao stabbed out with his sword, Chu Xiu suddenly took a step in a direction. It was this step that made Fang Qixiao's body stop abruptly, and a look of horror appeared in his eyes. His karma had been disrupted. He could not stab Chu Xiu with this sword. Ever since Fang Qixiao had successfully comprehended the karma sword principle, even the grandmasters of swordsmanship in Sword King City had been full of praise for him. If they were in his shoes, they would not know how to break it apart from forcefully resisting it. Now Fang Qixiao did not know whether his karma sword principle had been broken by Chu Xiu or not. In any case, it had been disrupted. If he forcefully attacked again, it would be considered a real failure. Fang Qixiao had a rare look of seriousness on his face. He had thought that he would be able to deal with Chu Xiu with a single sword strike, but he had not expected to encounter such a strange thing. The long sword in his hand changed its trajectory, and the karma changed. On the other side, Chu Xiu also took a step forward and changed his karma again. The two of them changed their trajectories back and forth. In the eyes of everyone present, Fang Qixiao and Chu Xiu seemed to be fooling around. One person's sword momentum was slow, and he would stop midway, while the other person was simply walking around in the arena. However, they did not know that Chu Xiu and Fang Qixiao's mental strength had been stretched to the extreme. The change in karma was a competition of their understanding of their own martial path, and the strength of their mental strength. Chu Xiu had insisted on attacking Fang Qixiao for this scene. From the moment Fang Qixiao had used the karma sword principle to defeat Yan Fian, Chu Xiu had already had a plan. His heaven's sun gazing at air skill was extremely difficult to cultivate, and he could not even make progress in closed-door training. He could only hone it through killing. However, even so, the progress of the heaven's sun gazing at air skill was very slow. That was until Chu Xiu saw Fang Qixiao's karma sword principle, which was actually somewhat similar to the heaven's sun gazing at air skill. They were both related to karma, so Chu Xiu wanted to use Fang Qixiao's karma sword principle to hone his own power. As it turned out, Chu Xiu was right. Every time Fang Qixiao changed the trajectory of his sword, Chu Xiu had to exert all his mental strength to perform the heaven's sun gazing at air skill. Under such pressure, although his mental strength was stretched to the extreme, the cultivation of the heaven's sun gazing at air skill improved visibly under the pressure. At this moment, the other martial Dao masters present revealed a hint of shock in their eyes. They had long known that Fang Qixiao was talented, so they were not surprised that Fang Qixiao displayed such a cultivation level. Now that Chu Xiu was also good at martial arts related to karma, he could even fight Fang Qixiao to such a stalemate. Although they knew that the current Chu Xiu was definitely not Fang Qixiao's match, it was clear that Chu Xiu had the potential to catch up to Fang Qixiao's level. On the high platform, Cheng Tingshan from the Hidden Sword Villa said sourly, "Guanzhong torture room is really lucky. There are almost many talents in the past few generations. First, there was Chu Kuang's song that shook the Jianghu, and then there was Guan Siyu who turned the tide. This generation has Chu Xiu. This Guanzhong torture hall is really lucky." Among the 5 major sword sects, only the Hidden Sword Villa and the Yunnu Palace had weak potential. The Yunnu Palace was weak because they only accepted female disciples, and the Jianghu was dominated by men. Therefore, it could be said that the Yunnu Palace excluded 80% of the Jianghu people. Moreover, the Yunnu Swordplay Codex itself was also an unstable factor. As for the Hidden Sword Villa, the reason was even simpler. Although there were outsiders in the Hidden Sword Villa, the Cheng clan had always been in charge of the villa. It was almost like an aristocratic family. As a result, the Hidden Sword Villa's secret techniques, as well as some of their treasured swords, could only be used by the Cheng family. Even if outsiders were powerful, the Cheng family would not be at ease to hand over the techniques and weapons to them. The Sword King City's martial Dao master suppressed his surprise and said indifferently, "So what if he's lucky? Potential doesn't equal strength." Fang Qixiao won this round, and Fang Qixiao will continue to win in the future. Although Chu Xiu has potential, he can't threaten Fang Qixiao of Sword King City. Cheng Tingshan sneered and did not say anything. Although he did not like Sword King City, he would not say anything under such circumstances. After all, Fang Qixiao was a member of the 5 major sword sects, while Chu Xiu was a member of Guanzhong Torture Room. Even if the 5 major sword sects had conflicts with each other, they still had to unite against outsiders. At this time, Fang Qixiao had changed his sword 9 times in a row, but he did not manage to stab all 9 times before Chu Xiu's heaven's sun gazing at air saw through him. In the end, Fang Qixiao had no choice but to withdraw his sword. At this time, Chu Xiu's mental energy was almost at its limit. When he saw that Fang Qixiao still wanted to change his sword stance, Chu Xiu said directly, "There's no need to fight. I admit defeat." Everyone present was stunned. That's it. The two of them took a few steps forward inexplicably, and Chu Xiu admitted defeat without even making a move? Didn't you say that you're not used to admitting defeat? Why do you say it so skillfully now? But no matter what, the warriors below the stage were all dumbfounded. completely unable to make heads or tails of what was going on. Feng Qixiao put the long sword in his hand back on his back and glared at Chu Xiu fiercely. So you're using me as your whetstone? I even wanted to treat you to a meal. Now you should be the one treating me. Although Feng Qixiao was a little unruly, he was not an idiot. On the contrary, Feng Qixiao was very smart. When they were fighting just now, he was focused on the sword principle, so he did not notice it. It was only when Chu Xiu admitted defeat while sweating profusely that Feng Qixiao realized that although he had won this round, he had been tricked by Chu Xiu and helped him hone his martial arts. Winning or losing didn't matter to Chu Xiu from the beginning. Therefore, he was ungrateful and insisted on fighting with Feng Qixiao. He wanted to use Feng Qixiao to hone his heaven sun gazing at air cultivation. Hearing this, Chu Xiu smiled and said, "It's not a problem to have a meal together, but I'm guessing that your seniors in Sword King City don't want us to be together. Moreover, it's also a problem if you can come out after returning to Sword King City. That fellow who I don't know if he's your senior brother or martial uncle will definitely report you." Chapter 395. In the battle with Feng Qixiao, Chu Xiu seemed to have lost, but in fact he had gained something. The heaven's sun gazing at air could only have an obvious breakthrough under this kind of pressure. If Feng Qixiao was willing to be Chu Xiu's sparring partner, Chu Xiu was even confident that he could cultivate the heaven's sun gazing at air to a proficient level in a short period of time. But obviously, this was not going to happen. Now Feng Qixiao was already very unhappy. Although he had won in the end, he felt like he had suffered a loss. After the younger generation's arena competition was over, the prizes were not distributed on the spot. Instead, they were going to be distributed to everyone after the World Sword Sect conference ended. Next, it was time for the martial Dao masters to spar with each other. Everyone was excited about it. After all, for most of the warriors present, it was very difficult for them to see martial arts grandmaster level experts fight. Even if they could not understand it, as long as they saw it, it would be enough for them to brag for a long time. Han Tingyi and the other people from the 5 major sword sects looked at each other. They walked down the high platform at the same time and stood in the arena. Everyone present instantly started discussing in low voices when they saw these people. These people were all renowned grandmasters of the sword Dao from the 5 major sword sections. The beautiful woman in palace attire from the Yunu Palace was the current palace master of the Yunu Palace, Moon Shadow Star Mark, Lin Fengya. Although she was not famous in the martial arts world, she was not small either. Of course, her fame was mostly because of her identity as the palace master of the Yunu Palace. Lin Fengya was ranked 25th on the honor list. Her ranking was even higher than Han Tingyi in the Sword Hut. But in reality, the people of the martial arts world also knew that Lin Fengya's ranking on the honor list was actually somewhat high. With her strength, it was difficult for her to even enter the top 30. Now, she was ranked 25th because of her identity as the palace master of the Yunu Palace. More importantly, it was because she was one of the few women on the honor list that her ranking was so high. The martial artist with 7 swords on his back was the master of the Hidden Sword Villa, Heartless Sword Tomb Chung Tingshan. He originally carried 10 swords, but the other 3 had been broken. He had broken 3 swords and killed 3 people. Of the 3 people who had died, one was a murderer who had become sworn enemies with the Hidden Sword Villa in the past, while the other 2 were powerful figures of the demonic Dao. Chung Tingshan's strength was not weak among the martial Dao masters. However, the Hidden Sword Villa had been on the decline recently, and Chung Tingshan was not a woman, so naturally, he did not receive any preferential treatment. Therefore, he was only ranked 33rd on the honor roll, not even in the top 30. The white-robed warrior from Sword King City was the first seat of Sword King City's Xingjian Hall, Formless Sword by Qian. He was ranked 30th on the Wind Cloud list, second only to Han Tingyi of the Sword Hut. Among the 4 major sword halls of Sword King City, the Xingjian Hall specialized in sword techniques. However, Bai Qian had already transformed his sword techniques into a realm where incorporeal triumphed over corporeal, so his nickname was Formless Sword. From this, one could see Bai Qian's terrifying cultivation in the way of the sword. The last person was the white-robed, barefooted young man with a broken sword mark on his forehead from the Windcloud Sword Tomb. In fact, among the 5 martial Dao masters, he had the most powerful background. The Windcloud Sword Tomb was a place where swords were hidden. Legend had it that in ancient times, when some sword Dao masters were on the verge of death, they would bury their swords in a place. That place was the Windcloud Sword Tomb, according to the customs of the Jianghu. The swords of the sword Dao masters were definitely extremely precious weapons, or even divine weapons. Therefore, the disciples or servants of the sword Dao masters would spontaneously build huts around the Windcloud Sword Tomb to protect the divine weapons and treasured swords in the tomb. Later on, as the number of people guarding the Windcloud Sword Tomb increased, their descendants also multiplied, and they joined together to form a sword Dao sect. It could be said that the Windcloud Sword Tomb was the inheritance of countless sword Dao masters in the past. It could be said that the Windcloud Sword Tomb was the strongest among the 5 major sword sects. Moreover, even if the Windcloud Sword Tomb's experts of a certain generation withered, no one dared to provoke it, because no one knew what kind of mysterious or evil existence Windcloud Sword Tomb would invite from the place where swords were hidden. Legend had it that the Windcloud Sword Tomb suffered a blow more than 2,000 years ago. The entire Windcloud Sword Tomb was left with an old martial Dao master. Therefore, an enemy sect came to the Windcloud Sword Tomb. The enemy had 6 martial Dao masters, and the sect's experts gathered, wanting to completely destroy the Windcloud Sword Tomb. In the end, the old martial Dao master used his own blood as a sacrifice to invite a sword spirit that was formed from the Windcloud Sword Tomb's countless killing intents. It actually slaughtered the 6 martial Dao masters. Although the martial Dao master of the Windcloud Sword Tomb exhausted his blood and passed away in less than 3 days, it also let the entire underworld know that the Windcloud Sword Tomb was not to be trifled with. Even if there was only one person left, no one knew what other trump cards he had. The white-clothed barefooted young man had a very mysterious origin. Legend had it that outsiders couldn't enter the Windcloud Sword Tomb's land of buried swords. To be precise, only warriors with chi could enter. As long as they approached, they would trigger the formation. Because the land of buried swords was connected to a barren forest, a wild wolf entered the land of buried swords with a baby boy in its mouth. It threw the baby boy next to a broken sword and fed him with wolf milk every day. The baby boy didn't cry or make a fuss. He was only discovered by the people of the Windcloud Sword Tomb when he was 3 years old. For a time, the entire Windcloud Sword Tomb was shaken. For some reason, the baby boy seemed to have formed a strange connection with the broken sword beside him. The broken sword spirit had dissipated, and a new spirit was born, turning it into a new god weapon. Later, the baby was raised by the Windcloud Sword Tomb and accepted as a disciple. Even the deceased previous leader of the Windcloud Sword Tomb, the old sword god Guillermo, took him as a disciple and taught him swordsmanship. Because he didn't have parents and didn't even know what his surname was, Guillermo named him Yanji, because the broken sword that accompanied him was called Yanji. Yanji also became the most special existence in the Windcloud Sword Tomb. He was born with a god weapon, and that god weapon was connected to his flesh and blood. When he cultivated to the unity of heaven and man realm, the god weapon could fuse with his body. No matter how long he lived, he could guarantee that he wouldn't age. It was very miraculous. Yanji was ranked 23rd on the Windcloud Sword Tomb, but everyone in the underworld said that Yanji's ranking was definitely higher than that. He didn't fight many times, but every time he did, he would easily defeat his opponents. Under the broken sword, there was no one who survived. Among the 5 people present, Yanji could be said to be the strongest and the most unfathomable. If there were no accidents, the champion of this arena competition should be Yanji. However, although the 5 of them were going to compete on the arena, those who were familiar with the inside story knew that they were just putting on a show for the Devil Dao. The Good Fortune Heavenly Demon flag didn't have much meaning to the 5 great sword sects. They wouldn't fight to the death for this thing. The only goal of the 5 of them going on the arena was to lure the Devil Dao to attack. Han Tingyi said to everyone present in a deep voice, "Everyone, the second round has begun. I will first show my incompetence. Our 5 great sword sects will exchange pointers with each other, so we won't waste time with one-on-one games. The 5 of us will fight together to determine the winner." As he spoke, Han Tingyi and the other 4 began to fight, immediately attracting the attention of everyone present. It was indeed rare to see 5 sword masters fight, but Chu Xiu only took a few glances before losing interest. These people were really acting. They weren't paying attention at all. Although the 5 of them fought with sword qi and astral energy, in reality, the 5 of them didn't even use 10% of their power. Han Tingyi didn't use the powerful sword intent of the sword hut at all. Cheng Tingshan only used one of his 7 swords, and he didn't use the white submerged invisible sword either. Instead, he used many sword moves that looked gorgeous but were just for show. Lin Fengyao was the same. She didn't use the natural power of the Yu Maiden swordplay. It wasn't even as good as Yan Fian's previous attack. The one who was the most outrageous was Yan Ji. Everyone wanted to see how he would fuse the Yan Ji sword into his body. In the end, he did not even draw his sword. He condensed his true qi and used his sword fingers to attack. It was really outrageous. Of course, for the wandering martial artists, Han Tingyi and the others were already fighting fiercely enough. They enjoyed watching. After about 2 hours of chaotic fighting, the 5 of them finally decided the winner. The final winner was actually Cheng Tingshan of the Hidden Sword Villa. Seeing this result, everyone present curled their lips. They really didn't pay attention. How could such a result come out? However, the people from the 5 major sword sects didn't care about the discussions below. Han Tingyi cupped his hands and said, "Everyone, the outcome of our 5 major sword sects spar has been decided. Villa Master Cheng of the Hidden Sword Villa has deep attainments in the way of the sword, and is ahead of us. Is there anyone else who wants to come up and spar? The winner can take away the demonic creation flag." The martial arts masters below all raised their eyebrows, but no one said a word. They all knew that this time, the people from the 5 major sword sects wanted to lure out the people from the demonic path. They didn't object to this, but they also couldn't be bothered to get involved. So naturally, no one spoke at this time. However, at this time, a hoarse old voice came from below. "Can your 5 major sword sects act any more fake? This kid from the Hidden Sword Villa has no attainments in the way of the sword. He carries so many swords all day like a peacock spreading its tail. Doesn't he know that the more cocky a person is, the faster they die? Who is 10 Directions Divine Sword Cheng Nambe to you? Is he your grandfather or your great-grandfather? That old guy also likes to carry 10 swords on his back and run around in the pugilistic world. In the end, I broke his neck and broke 9 of his swords. The remaining one looked good, so I made it into a door bolt. It's still hanging on the door of my cottage." Chapter 396. As the hoarse old voice rang out, a young man in white with a jade-like face walked out from the crowd, gently fanning himself with a folding fan. However, his steps did not seem like that of a young man, but more like that of an old man. Han Tingyi and the others immediately became serious. He was finally here. However, Cheng Tingshan's expression was ugly because this man was insulting their Hidden Sword Mountain Villa. Cheng Nambe was not his grandfather, nor was he his great-grandfather. Instead, he was an ancestor of the Hidden Sword Mountain Villa's Cheng clan. He was someone of the same generation as his great-grandfather, but he was killed by the demonic Tao in his early years. However, that was more than 200 years ago, and Cheng Tingshan was only in his 50s. At that time, even his father hadn't been born yet. Cheng Tingshan had only occasionally seen a description of it in the family tree. How could he remember it so clearly? However, this man in front of him said that he was the one who killed his ancestor. Didn't that mean that this man had lived for at least 200 years? Who was this man? Cheng Tingshan thought about it, and suddenly thought of something. He suddenly shouted in shock, "Jadeface Heavenly Demon! You're Jadeface Heavenly Demon Wei Shuya! You're not dead yet!" As soon as this was said, the crowd immediately went into an uproar. Although more than 200 years had passed, the reputation of the 9 Mountains' 5 great demons was still very famous. Wei Shuya twisted his neck. His appearance changed from that of a handsome young man to that of an old man with a face full of wrinkles. "Tsk tisk, it's not easy. I didn't expect someone to still remember me. It seems that your hidden sword mountain villa still holds a grudge. Could it be that you've been thinking about how to kill me all these years? Han Tingyi and the others all frowned. It seemed that they had really provoked the demonic Dao this time. Even an old demonic Dao monster like Wei Shuya had come out. On the other side, Cheng Tingshan's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. He said, "The people of my Hidden Sword Mountain Villa will not die in vain. All these years, my Hidden Sword Mountain Villa did not make a move, because we thought you were dead. I didn't expect you to still be alive. However, it's a pity that you could have continued to live for a while. In the end, you voluntarily jumped out to die. You can't blame me for this." As soon as he finished speaking, the 5 longswords behind Cheng Tingshan were unsheathed at the same time. Violent earth energy gathered on the swords, forming a sword formation that enveloped Wei Shuya. At the same time, Cheng Tingshan held a longsword in each of his hands. He used 2 sword techniques at the same time and attacked Wei Shuya. In the past, the 9 Mountains' 5 great skyfiends were indeed famous. Even the Hidden Sword Villa's ancestor had died at Wei Shuya's hands. However, when Cheng Tingshan faced Wei Shuya, he was still confident that he could defeat him. The reason was simple. Wei Shuya was old. In the Jianghu, it was not the case that the older one was, the stronger one would be. If that was the case, then everyone should stop fighting and find a place to go into seclusion. Let's see who lived the longest, and who would be the king of the Jianghu. No matter how arrogant you were in the pugilistic world, you couldn't resist the ravages of time. Cheng Tingshan was only in his 50s at the moment. For a martial Dao master, he was in the prime of his life, when his qi and blood were at their strongest. What about Wei Shuya? He was already old, completely old. In fact, even if Wei Shuya didn't attack him after a while, he would probably die of old age. There was no need for Cheng Tingshan to be afraid of such an old thing with declining qi and blood. However, before his sword formation could land, he saw Wei Shuya yawn lightly. However, this yawn was like a demonic sound piercing through the ears. A huge sound wave suddenly erupted, taking away one's soul. Almost in the blink of an eye, the sword formation that Cheng Tingshan had set up was completely destroyed. Cheng Tingshan's eyes revealed a look of horror. This old thing was already more than 200 years old. How could he still be so powerful? However, before he could react, he saw Wei Shuya stretch out a hand and suddenly press down. In an instant, the surrounding qi of heaven and earth all turned into monstrous demonic qi, condensing into a giant hand that was hundreds of feet long. It was like a mountain with 5 fingers, crushing down on Cheng Tingshan. Demonic devouring myriad worlds, sky-covering palm. Before the palm energy landed, Cheng Tingshan had already spat out a mouthful of blood from the terrifying pressure. A few days ago at the Bone Tree Villa, Wei Shuya had also attacked Mountain Ghost. However, Mountain Ghost was a member of the moon-worshipping cult after all. The bright demons and the hidden demons were still preparing to join forces. Of course, they would not fall out with each other. Therefore, Wei Shuya still held back when he attacked. He only taught Mountain Ghost a little and did not go all out. However, it was different against Cheng Tingshan now. Wei Shuya was going to kill him. At that moment, Cheng Tingshan looked at the giant demonic qi hand in shock and said hoarsely, "True fire spirit refinement. You actually broke through to the true fire spirit refinement." It was not easy to step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm, but breaking through to the true fire spirit refinement was even more difficult. Back when Wei Shuya was still at his peak, he had not even reached the true fire spirit refinement. Now that Wei Shuya was old, and had basically no chance of advancing further, how did he reach his current realm? However, there was no time for Cheng Tingshan to think at this moment. If the palm landed, he would probably be seriously injured even if he did not die. At that moment, Han Tingyi and the others who were standing behind Cheng Tingshan also came to his rescue in time. After all, they were all standing on the same side. Han Tingyi unsheathed the long sword in his hand with one hand. The seemingly ordinary redwood scabbard hid a dazzling long sword. The vacant sword. As Han Tingyi unsheathed the vacant sword in his hand, all the power in the world condensed into sword momentum, and met Wei Shuya's palm. At that moment, he slashed out with his sword, which was also the world. The white-clothed, barefooted Yanji extended his index finger, and pointed it between his eyebrows. The golden broken sword mark shone brightly, and a golden broken sword materialized from illusion and emerged from within Yanji's body. As he pointed his finger forward, the broken sword whizzed towards the demonic palm in midair. However, the golden broken sword was surrounded by a terrifyingly powerful sword aura. It extended for dozens of feet, and its power was incomparably great. A loud noise was heard, and Han Tingyi and the other two took a step back. The three of them worked together, and barely managed to block Wei Shuya's palm. One could imagine how terrifying Wei Shuya was at that moment. Looking at those people, Wei Shuya's old face revealed a cold expression. The juniors are useless. They can't even withstand a single blow. To the others present, Han Tingyi and the others were seniors in the pugilistic world and unattainable martial Dao masters. However, to an old antique like Wei Shuya, they were genuine juniors. After all, when he was dominating the pugilistic world, these people were not even born yet. However, at that moment, a majestic voice suddenly sounded. Wei Shuya, you said that they can't withstand a single blow. How about I do it now? I heard that you have the best relationship with the Crimson Blood Demon among the 5 Sky Fiends of 9th Sky Mountain. I didn't believe it at first. When I destroyed 9th Sky Mountain, I wanted to kill you. However, the Crimson Blood Demon risked his life to stop me. He didn't retreat even after I killed 9 of his Blood Gu avatars. In the end, I shattered his heart meridian with my sword and bought you time to escape. Otherwise, do you think you would still be alive today? Do you think you can show off your power in front of the 5 major sword sects? The Crimson Blood Demon used his life to buy you a chance to live, but you didn't cherish it. What? Have you finally lived enough? As the voice faded, an old man in a golden python robe walked down from the high platform. He had a long sword hanging from his waist, which was as red as fire. What was shocking was that his feet were completely suspended in the air, as if there were invisible steps below him. This move was called the Sky Suspension Ladder. In fact, most warriors at the unity of heaven and man realm could do it. They used their spiritual chi to temporarily support their body, which would create such a mysterious effect. However, this old man was different. No one could sense a trace of spiritual chi fluctuations from his body. Every time he took a step, the power of heaven and earth automatically flowed into his feet, providing him with support. It was simply terrifying. All the cultivators below were dumbfounded. Who was this person? However, from the tone of this person, it was obvious that he was an older expert from the same generation as Wei Shuya. He had participated in the battle to kill the 5 sky demons of the 9 Heavens Mountain, and had even killed a sky demon. Among the young warriors present, they naturally paid attention to the Longhu list. They had naturally heard of the Fengyan list, but they really didn't know much about these things that happened hundreds of years ago. However, grandmasters like Xiahozhen were very familiar with the matters of the Jianghu. Almost instantly, they guessed the identity of this old man. They said in shock, "It's the king of Jiannan, Duguli." Duguli's nickname was the king of Jiannan. This king was not an honorific title like Sword Venerable or Sword Saint. He was indeed a king in the past. 200 years ago, other than the northern Yan, western Chu and eastern Qi, there were some small countries such as the Wei Kingdom, which was the predecessor of the Wei County. Duguli was a king in the state of Liang. He was even the elder brother of the emperor of the state of Liang. Back then, Duguli was actually the crown prince of the state of Liang. However, he was obsessed with swordsmanship. He gave up the position of crown prince to his younger brother, and became an idle king to practice swordsmanship. He even traveled the Jianghu to seek advice from swordsmanship experts. Later on, Duguli joined the Sword King city to practice swordsmanship in seclusion. He was once the first seat of the Sword King city's combat sword hall. Later on, he became an elder of the Sword King city. However, after the state of Liang was destroyed by the Northern Yan, Duguli became a loner. He even went to the Northern Yan royal family to seek revenge. He single-handedly slaughtered the Northern Yan army, one of the 5 armies of the state of Northern Yan. He killed several generals of the Northern Yan army. In the end, he was seriously injured by an expert of the Northern Yan army and fled. Duguli was quite famous 200 years ago. One could even say that he was a fanatic. If it was anyone else, even if their own country was destroyed by the Northern Yan, they wouldn't have the guts to challenge the Northern Yan dynasty. Even if the entire Sword King city came, it would be useless. However, Du Guli dared to single-handedly kill his way to the Northern Yan kingdom to seek revenge. Not many people had this kind of courage. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.